The meaning of a word is its use in the language. Every conversation you have ever had is two people pretending they understand each other while actually having completely different experiences in their heads. You tell your friend about your stressful day. They nod sympathetically and say, "I totally get it. I had one of those last week." You both feel like you've connected over shared experience, but here's what actually happened. You had a specific, unique experience that you called stressful. Your friend heard the word stressful and matched it to their own completely different experience that they also call stressful. Neither of you accessed the other's actual experience. You just matched public labels to private feelings. This seems impossible. Surely when you talk about being angry, sad, or excited, people understand what you're experiencing. Surely language lets you share your inner world with others. An Austrian philosopher named Ludwig Wittgenstein discovered something that will completely change how you understand human communication. Truly private thoughts are impossible to share through language. And this revelation explains why you always feel slightly misunderstood, why deep conversations often feel incomplete, and why even your closest relationships have an unbridgeable gap. The privacy you think you have is partly an illusion. Your private thoughts are constructed from public language that everyone shares. But your actual experience of those thoughts remains completely inaccessible to others. This creates a strange paradox. Your inner life is simultaneously more public and more private than you realize. More public because the words you use to think come from outside you. More private because your actual experience of those words can never be shared. And this changes everything about how communication works and why it so often doesn't. Part 2. The language trick that creates fake understanding. When you describe your emotions, you're not actually describing your inner experience. You're applying public labels to private sensations that can't be directly communicated. Think about how you learned the word pain. Someone saw you crying after falling down and said, "Does it hurt?" They couldn't see your actual experience of pain. They just observed your behavior and taught you the public word that corresponds to those behaviors. Every emotional word you know was learned the same way. Sad, angry, happy, anxious, all public concepts that you learned to apply to whatever was happening inside you. But here's what's fascinating. Your actual experience of these emotions is completely inaccessible to others. When you say, "I'm anxious," people can understand the public concept of anxiety, but they can't access your specific experience of being anxious. This creates what Wittgenstein called the beetle in the box problem. Imagine everyone carries a box labeled beetle that only they can look inside. When people talk about their beetle, they're using the same public word, but the contents of each box could be completely different, or one box could be empty. Your emotional experiences are like beetles in boxes. The public words are shared, but the private experiences remain forever hidden. This is why you can spend hours explaining your depression to someone who's never experienced it, and they still won't get it. They understand the public concept of depression, but they can't access your private experience of being depressed. It's also why two people can both call themselves introverted while having completely different internal experiences. They're using the same public label for potentially very different private realities. But here's what makes this really interesting. You've learned to organize your private experience around these public categories. You don't just use words to describe your feelings. You actually feel emotions in ways that match the public concepts you've learned. Your inner life is shaped by the outer language available to you, which means your most private thoughts aren't as private as you think. Part 3. The communication disaster, hiding in plain sight. Every deep conversation you've ever had was actually two people exchanging public concepts while their private experiences remained completely separate. You're telling your partner about feeling unappreciated. They hear the word unappreciated and match it to their own understanding of that concept. They respond with reassurance about how much they appreciate you. But you weren't talking about the same thing. You were talking about your private experience of feeling unappreciated, and they were talking about the public concept of appreciation. Your actual experience never got communicated, and their actual understanding never got shared. This happens in every conversation about emotions, relationships, and personal experiences. People think they're sharing their inner worlds, but they're actually just exchanging public vocabulary while their private experiences remain isolated. This is why relationship fights often feel like you're talking past each other. You're both using the same words, but referring to completely different internal realities. It's why therapy can feel frustrating. You're trying to communicate experiences that are fundamentally incommunicable to someone who's trying to understand experiences they can't access. It's why social media feels simultaneously connected and lonely. Everyone is using the same emotional vocabulary, but no one is actually sharing their real experience. And it's why you can feel misunderstood even by people who love you. They can understand your public language, but they can't access your private experience. This isn't anyone's fault. It's not because people aren't listening well enough or caring enough. It's because language literally cannot do what we expect it to do: give other people direct access to our inner experience. But here's what's really mind-bending. This communication disaster is so universal that we've all learned to pretend it's not happening. We act like understanding each other is possible, even though it's literally impossible. We've built an entire culture around the fiction that language can bridge the gap between private experiences, and we feel defective when it fails to do so. Part 4. The therapy illusion that everyone believes. The entire mental health industry is built on the assumption that talking about your inner experience can help someone else understand and fix it. Wittgenstein's insight reveals why this is fundamentally impossible. When you tell your therapist, "I feel depressed," they can't access your actual experience of depression. They can only access your public language description of that experience, and that description is already multiple translations away from your actual inner state. Your experience gets translated into everyday language, which gets translated into therapeutic concepts, which gets translated into treatment strategies. By the time this process is complete, the connection to your actual experience is so distant that the intervention might not address what's actually happening inside you. This doesn't mean therapy is useless. It can help you develop coping strategies, recognize patterns, and build skills. But it can't do what many people expect it to do: give you or your therapist direct access to your inner experience. Yet the therapeutic model encourages people to believe that putting experiences into words is the same as understanding them, that talking about feelings is the same as processing them, that being able to describe your emotions means you're more in touch with them. Actually, you might be getting further away from your actual experience by constantly translating it into therapeutic language. The words you use to describe your mental state in therapy aren't neutral descriptions. They're interpretive frameworks that shape how you experience your own mind. When you learn to call your reactions trauma responses instead of just how you feel, you're not gaining insight into your inner experience. You're learning to organize your experience around professional categories that might not match your actual inner reality. This creates the illusion of self-understanding while potentially disconnecting you from your authentic experience. But everyone, including many therapists, believes this process provides genuine insight into inner experience. The truth is more complex. Therapy can help you function better, but it can't make the incommunicable communicable. Part 5. The relationship gaps that can't be bridged. The reason you feel misunderstood by people who love you isn't because they don't care enough. It's because understanding your inner experience is literally impossible. Your partner can learn your behavioral patterns, your triggers, your preferences, and your needs. They can respond appropriately to your emotional states and provide comfort when you're struggling. But they can't access your actual experience of being you. They can't feel what you feel or think what you think. The privacy of consciousness is absolute. This creates a strange situation. You can be deeply known by someone who doesn't actually understand your inner experience, and you can feel lonely with someone who loves you completely. The gap isn't a relationship failure. It's a feature of human consciousness. Your inner experience is fundamentally private, no matter how much you want to share it or how much others want to understand it. But here's what's liberating about recognizing this. You can stop expecting your relationships to provide perfect understanding and start appreciating what they can actually provide. Consistent presence, reliable behavior, shared experiences, physical comfort, practical support. These forms of connection don't require access to inner experience. In fact, the most intimate relationships often involve less talking about feelings and more sharing of activities, touch, and presence. The people who feel most connected aren't necessarily the ones who understand each other's inner worlds. They're the ones who've learned to connect through shared reality rather than shared understanding. This is why long-term couples often communicate more through actions and presence than through deep conversations about feelings. They've learned that perfect understanding is impossible, but consistent care is achievable. The goal isn't to eliminate the gap between inner experiences. It's to find meaningful connection that doesn't depend on bridging that gap. Part 6. The cultural lies about emotional sharing. Modern culture has created a myth that emotional sharing leads to deeper connection. This myth is making people lonelier while they think they're being more intimate. The idea that vulnerability creates connection assumes that sharing your inner experience makes you more knowable to others. But if inner experience is incommunicable, then vulnerability is just the performance of intimacy, not intimacy itself. This doesn't mean emotional sharing is worthless. It can serve important functions, building trust, creating empathy, establishing mutual care. But it can't do what people expect it to do: give others access to your inner world. The cultural emphasis on deep conversations and emotional intimacy sets up impossible expectations. People think that if they just find the right words, they can make themselves fully understood. When this fails, they blame themselves or their relationships. Actually, the failure is built into the nature of language and consciousness. Your inner experience is private not because you're bad at communicating it, but because privacy is a fundamental feature of consciousness. But admitting this would undermine huge industries built on the promise of emotional connection through communication. Therapy, self-help, relationship coaching, and social media all profit from the belief that sharing inner experience creates genuine understanding. The truth is more complex. Emotional sharing can create the experience of being cared for, but it can't create the experience of being understood. These are different things that often get confused. Being cared for is achievable through consistent behavior and mutual support. Being understood requires access to inner experience, which is impossible. Most people are actually seeking care, not understanding. But they've been taught to believe that understanding is how you get care. This creates frustration when the understanding never comes, even though the care might be readily available. Part 7. The communication freedom that changes everything. Once you accept that inner experience is incommunicable, you can stop expecting language to do the impossible and start using it for what it actually can accomplish. Here's how to communicate more effectively once you understand these limits. Focus on coordination, not understanding. The goal of communication isn't to share your inner experience. It's to coordinate behavior and create shared meaning. "I need space to think about this" is more useful than trying to explain exactly how you feel. Use specific requests instead of emotional descriptions. "Please text me if you'll be more than 30 minutes late" is clearer than "I get anxious when you don't communicate." Focus on what you need, not what you feel. Accept that translation is always incomplete. When you communicate anything important, assume something will be lost in translation. This isn't a failure, it's the nature of language. Build in clarification processes and don't expect perfect understanding. Create connection through shared activities, not shared understanding. Cooking together, taking walks, working on projects, or simply being present can create intimacy without requiring successful communication of inner experience. Recognize the difference between being cared for and being understood. You can be deeply cared for by someone who doesn't understand your inner experience, and you can feel understood by someone who doesn't actually care about you. These are different needs that require different approaches. Practice describing behavior instead of feelings. "I've been sleeping poorly and avoiding social activities is more communicable than I feel depressed." Focus on what can be observed rather than what can only be felt. Use simple, personal language instead of borrowed concepts. "That makes me angry" is more authentic than "I'm triggered by that." Your own basic words are more genuine than professional or trendy vocabulary. Build tolerance for being misunderstood. The need to be understood is often really a need for validation. When you can validate your own experience, you become less dependent on others' ability to understand it. Remember that privacy isn't a problem to be solved. The fact that your inner experience is private doesn't mean you're isolated or defective. It means you're human. Connection doesn't require perfect understanding. It requires consistent care and mutual respect. This is exactly why we created Keys to the Psyche, to help you understand the philosophical foundations of human communication and develop realistic expectations about what language can and cannot do. Subscribe for more insights that help you navigate the fundamental limitations of human connection. The Private Language Revolution. Wittgenstein's insight changes everything once you really absorb it. Your thoughts aren't as private as you think, but your experience is more private than language can bridge. This means you can stop feeling defective when people don't understand your inner experience and start appreciating the forms of connection that are actually possible. It means you can stop expecting perfect understanding from relationships and start valuing consistent care and mutual support. Most importantly, it means you can stop trying to communicate the incommunicable and start finding meaning in the shared public world that makes any communication possible at all. If this exploration has made you realize why communication so often feels incomplete, that's not depressing, it's liberating. Understanding the limits of language frees you from impossible expectations and opens up possibilities for connection that don't depend on perfect understanding. The privacy of experience isn't a bug in human consciousness. It's what makes you uniquely yourself. The goal isn't to eliminate privacy, but to find meaningful connection that doesn't require bridging the unbridgeable. We don't just explore ideas, we decode the most powerful psychological and philosophical insights ever spoken by the world's greatest thinkers. From Wittgenstein to Nietzsche, from Baudrillard to Jung. If they've changed the way we understand reality, identity, or consciousness, we'll reveal how. Subscribe now, because what you learn here won't just change how you think, it'll change what you think. Your journey toward communication freedom starts with accepting that perfect understanding is impossible. And once you stop expecting the impossible, actual connection becomes possible.